Hello and welcome to Them's Writing Words, a podcast discussing selected fanfictions from the world of pastel horse literature. My name is Scribbler, and I will be your moderator today. I am going to move my microphone closer first. That will be better. Joining me for this discussion, we have... Hang on, who do we have? We have ShadowofCygnus. Fuck off!
Hello.
And
it's greetings and good cheer.
Hello and fuck off!
My life in a nutshell.
Didn't deserve that.
This is the treatment we ought to expect.
Yes,
Oh, yes.
fuck all of you. We'll start that again, shall we?
No, leave it in. Who's next?
We need a blooper reel for this.
Your blooper reel. You're just lucky if I don't fucking leave it in the first place. Keep claiming I'm going to leave stuff out, and I never do. Right. My name is Scribbler, and I will be your moderator today. Joining me for this discussion, we have ShadowofCygnus.
Salutations.
Goombasa.
Heyo.
Luna Farrowe.
Hello.
Neighrator Pony.
Good morning.
Thornquill.
Hello, everyone.
And in his podcast debut, Illya Leonov.
Good hello, everyone.
Hey!
Yay!
This, it bears saying at the very start of this is the first time we've ever had everybody in the podcast together. So this is a very special podcast because we don't usually have this many people. Make the most of it, listeners, because it probably won't happen again.
Is there going to be a moral at the end?
A moral? I don't know. What's the moral?
It's a very special podcast, after all.
The moral, according to Scribbler, is fuck you.
No.
Fuck me, specifically.
Wheel of morality, turn, turn, turn. Show us the lesson that we should learn.
Don't eat yellow snow. That seems like a pretty good lesson to me.
All right, we've made it through the introductions. Well done, everyone.
It's too early for this.
We've made it through the introductions. We haven't even said what fic we're doing. This is good. Today we're looking at the fanfic Sera by Ponydora Prancy Pants. This was chosen by Neighrator, so he is going to read the synopsis.
Princess Celestia always knew that Twilight Sparkle was destined for great things, but she never revealed the source of that knowledge, not even to those closest to her. When the day of Twilight's true destiny finally arrives, can Celestia fulfill an ancient promise to save Equestria's past, present, and future? Even it means saying goodbye to Twilight forever. How can Celestia refuse her mother's last wish?
I'm so pleased that you said that exactly as it was written in the actual synopsis.
It is my very first time noticing, yeah.
Me too, but that just makes it better. This story was published on 23rd of February 2013 and clocks in at 15,437 words. So, we're going to go straight to the podcast, its discussion itself. We will be spoiler-free for a little bit, and then I will signal when we are into spoiler territory. So, to begin with, as ever, tags. Do we believe the tags are accurate in this one? And in a strange theme, this story, just like the previous two, only has one tag, and its single tag is sad. So, Narrator, you get to defend it first of all. Is this accurate?
It is a sad story, yes.
Yes, but is it accurate that it's only a sad story?
What other, I'm not sure what other tags would fit necessarily. I think I might be okay with just sad.
Drama? Romance? Friendship?
Drama's just such a catch-all. It's friendship, they're all friendship is magic stories. Presumably there'll be some bit of friendship in there sometimes.
Slice of life?
Definitely not slice of life.
There is a lot of slice of life. This is life sliced up into little pieces and presented to us.
Don't think
this is literally the ponies building new lives, and we see slices of it. That would seem pretty accurate to me. Don't fight me.
I think you have strong feelings about that point, but we'll get into that, I suppose.
Luna, what do you think?
We could. I don't know if anybody would be down for adventure, maybe? As much as there's of adventure, it has adventure elements, even though they're not played out exactly the way an adventure story normally does play out.
Goombasa?
I was just going to agree with Luna on that one, because I was thinking that, but then I thought about it for a second, and I'm like, can you really justify putting adventure as a tag on there? But, no, I'm glad that somebody else said it first, so yeah, I'm going to say adventure could potentially fit in there too.
Cygnus?
Well, unfortunately, they haven't come up with a melodrama tag yet, but
I agree.
Until they do, I think I'm good with the ones that we've got.
Thornquill?
I think adventure would apply. Kind of one of my litmus tests for adventure is, do they go to a completely new region that we haven't seen before? They do. So I think adventure could apply. It would warrant applying a lot more if anyone actually did anything over the course of the whole damn story. But that's another point.
Illya?
I don't see how you can't have the tag world building. I mean, it's not a lot of world building, but there's certainly a substantial enough amount of it for it to be in there.
Personally, I think that a tag that would be particularly accurate, but which doesn't yet exist on fanfiction, would be the bullshit tag.
Oh.
Hear those
There's my
bangers,
air
they be the
horn.
shots
I need to
fired.
find my air horn.
Wait. I was gonna say, where's Goosey? We need him.
Okay, can you do it again?
There
For
it
those
is.
not in the know, yes, we have a wild Gooty in this podcast. Right, moving on. Yeah. So,
Quick question, point
go
on the tags and stuff like that.
Go ahead.
I think adventure, in my mind at least, involves like going out, traveling somewhere, but also coming back. So that I don't think the adventure tag would apply in this story. Does everyone disagree?
I disagree with that. You can remain in the place you've gone to.
I think
so?
the problem with adding that tag was that the adventure simply wasn't fleshed out. I mean, there was the potential for adventure, but it just was too stilted for that.
Nothing happened, so.
Everything that could have been adventure, like maybe going into the things they do once they enter the new world, is really glossed over. So,
Fair.
in favor of like other stuff.
world building and babies, because clearly they're the same thing.
We'll get into that. Fair enough.
I don't know, there's an entire section of the fucking fandom who seems to think that.
Yeah.
Right, so, before we get into spoiler territory, narrator, a summary of the story, please. A description and your overall opinion. Like, why did you pick this one for us to talk about? Because you wanted this even before you remembered what title it was. So, go ahead.
I didn't know I was supposed to have it ready up beforehand. I'm sorry.
And that is a joke that only the 4 people who listened to our last podcast will understand. Go ahead.
Sorry. I chose this fic just because it was early on after I first started doing fic readings. It was one I just kind of kept seeing around everywhere. I'm not exactly sure how or why that happened. I think Present Perfect reviewed it, and then maybe someone else. I think it was featured on Fanfic I should say Equestria Daily. I'm pretty sure. So I just kind of kept running into it everywhere. I'd kind of been working under the assumption that it was kind of a fandom classic, which a lot of people I've talked to have heard of the story at least. So I don't know, it's just kind of well known, I guess.
I think some of that might be to do with the cover art is by Harwick's Art, who is a fandom classic in and of themselves.
The cover art is exceptional. I think we can all agree on that point. I hope.
Really is. I own posters purely of that artist's work. It's phenomenally good. Right up there with Assassin Monkey.
Okay, we're all agreed on one point at least. It might be the last one. We'll see.
The point we're agreed on is the picture is pretty. Goombasa, what do you think?
I didn't like this story very much, mostly because the entire story is predicated on a trope in fiction that I absolutely despise.
And that trope is?
That being?
Time travel. Particularly the idea of cyclical time, a time loop. Unless it stars Bill Murray, there is nothing that's going to get me to like your story if it has a time loop in it.
I think we're actually agreed on that point, but I put that as a bullet point, so I guess we'll get there.
Luna?
I'm sorry, I'm completely out of it. I'm also watching Guti play Fallout New Vegas at the moment, so...
Oh, for heaven's sake! Oh.
That's probably my opinion on the story, honestly. Like, I was looking at it and thinking, okay, this thing... I don't know how spoiler it is to say this story tries to invoke and use all 3 classic time travel fiction cliches, and none of them really works.
Illya, what do you think?
Well, when it first began, I liked the writing style well enough that I thought I would enjoy narrating it. But my main problem, which killed that idea later on, was that the pacing was awful. It started out nice and slow, and then it's like it fell off a cliff, and 1,000 points that I wanted fleshed out didn't get fleshed out. I'm not against time travel stories per se, but if you start doing that, then you need to put in a lot of things that explain a lot of things.
True. Thorny, what do you think?
Okay. So, I liked this story a lot less than I thought I was going to, because like NP, I've encountered this story just off and on over the years, always meant to get around to actually reading to it. And so when NP picked it, I was really excited because I thought, okay, finally, I'm going to read this thing. It's going to be, lots of cool world building and some twists and all that. I'm going to love it. And I find myself extremely let down. And I think just most criminally because I find it absolutely boring. And we'll get into a lot more reasons as to why I think it is boring later. But I'm really surprised at how much I didn't like the story.
And Cygnus.
Inoffensive. I mean, it's so okay. It's average. I'd say that the one point I'd give it is that it's emotionally fulfilling, if not necessarily intellectually.
Interesting. Right.
Inoffensive.
Okay, my opinion is that it's very meh, and that I actually found it intellectually fulfilling, but emotionally barren. But then again, we'll get into that when we get into writing style as to why I think that this was about as emotional as a painted stone that looks like a pony.
So it's not that I thought everyone would like this fic, but for heaven's sake, I thought...
Welcome to my world.
I'm so sorry, NP.
This story is both very widely known and extraordinarily highly rated. This would be a fairly safe pick just browsing through fanfiction as, this is probably a good story, which I think is kind of why I'm so shocked at it.
All right, I think we're gonna think I see the direction this is going, but let's proceed.
I'm
Sometimes
so
the only way out is
sorry.
through. That's okay.
It's one of those that just can't live up to its own hype, and that may be that if the story itself was just a little known one, we would be more forgiving. But because it is, as you say, it is a fandom classic. It's one that everybody tends to rate, if not put on best lists. And because of that, there is this tendency for us to rate things, there is this tendency for us to be harsher critics of things that are popular. Guys, I think we may have actually become hipsters. This is a bit disturbing.
You take that back.
Welcome,
Okay,
brother.
in complete fairness, I had no idea that this was a fandom classic. I went in completely blind, so...
Same.
Yeah, same here. I had never heard of this fic before.
Ditto.
I love how the most emotional we've been so far is when I called you hipsters.
Well, it's still early.
In complete fairness, my coworkers have called me a hipster to my face before, so...
Own it. Just own it.
Oh, I do.
Say, I am not a hipster. I am a goth. Thank you very much.
I would definitely have to get better glasses.
You haven't heard of my bands because they're in a genre you don't listen to.
Thing is, if you're listening to pony music, that's exactly right. I've had no word of a lie. It's like, of course, you wouldn't have heard of my music. My music is well beyond your ken. Go home and listen to 20% Cooler.
Right?
Right, we are into spoiler territory now. So, I'm not sure who to start with. I'm kind of spoilt for choice because part of me just wants to go straight for Thorny to let him let rip, but part of me wants to keep that just so that everybody else has got something to say.
No, by all
But,
means, go straight for the throat.
Okay, we are going for the jugular. Thornquill. General impression of what you think of this story. No holds barred on spoilers. Go on.
Okay, so just a general impression. I will say, I don't absolutely completely 100% despise this story. I don't want to rip it to shreds, build a bonfire out of it, and hit it with a laser from orbit or anything like that. But...
You sound like you've thought about that before.
Maybe. But I think its biggest problem is, like I said, it's boring. And my other biggest problem with it is its ending. And now that we're in spoiler-free territory, I don't know what the hell this ending is. I think it might be trying to emulate the kind of fantasy trope of we must sacrifice ourselves for the greater good. But the way it's written is we are totally cheerful and blasé about committing suicide and about committing murder and just in general dying. We don't really care about dying because that's the way it has to be, que sera, sera. And something is really fucked up about that.
Well, it's not that they're blasé about dying exactly. It's just that their souls have been committed to these, to the actual elements of harmony. Yeah, now that we're in spoiler territory, the whole fic essentially centers around the elements of harmony, that being the main six going back in time, and the circumstances under which they realize they have to transform themselves into the actual, literal, like gems elements of harmony. So I don't know that they committed suicide exactly. Their souls live on in the stones and in the stars and some other stuff, I think.
Is it going to hurt, Twilight? Fluttershy asked. I hope it's not going to hurt. I honestly don't know, Twilight replied. I hope not. Oh, okay.
Okay,
bye,
that
Twilight.
part was
Goodbye, Fluttershy. In a flash, Fluttershy dissolved into light that filled her butterfly-shaped gem with a warm pink glow.
Twilight, I don't feel so good.
How did I know that was going to come up?
Because you know that we're terrible people.
Oh my god.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay, Goombasa wants to say something.
You know, the entire time I was reading the ending of this story, the only thought I had in my head was, you know what? Dragonheart did it better.
Fucking yes.
Yeah. The Dragonheart, if you have never seen that movie, you should go out and watch it because Sean Connery plays a giant CGI dragon and it's magical. It has a lot of similar elements in its ending, and I found that to be much more tense, much more emotionally gripping, and much more interesting than the way that this story pulled it off.
Might be a bit unfair to expect a fan fiction to live up to the same, have the same impact as a multi-million-dollar movie production featuring Sean Connery, but I don't know.
No, it isn't.
Well, that comes down to the writing. Also, Dragonheart is not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
And fanfictions can be phenomenally good. Ponydora Prancerpants has written some fucking amazing fanfics that absolutely grip at your heartstrings and pull them out, tie them in a knot, and put them back. This just wasn't one of them. Cygnus.
Yeah, I think that we're hitting at kind of a central point that was intrinsic to my reading of this, which is that there's an essential tone problem throughout the entire thing. I mean, we've got no one can really seem to determine whether Spike is evil or not, and there had to be a happy ending on that front. No one can really seem to determine whether they're broken up or not about the having to die to become the elements of harmony, spoilers, at the end of the whole thing. And there's just random comedic bits throughout the entire thing that just feel completely out of place for the aforementioned sad tag. So just inconsistent overall.
Luna?
Oh boy. Okay, I've read this fic once. I had some time to stew about it and let it kind of settle in my mind, but everyone brings up really good points about it, and I'd like to add that the big thing that really bothered me was the time travel plot hole. I don't think that this is like the one where they die to become the elements of harmony, but then somehow magically are reincarnated or some shit in modern day Equestria in order to go back in time and become the elements in the first place.
Bootstrap Paradox.
Yes, there's this goddamn fic. It discusses the grandfather paradox and the butterfly effect, but what actually happens is a pair of bootstrap paradoxes.
Do you mind explaining those terms for listeners who are not familiar with them?
So grandfather paradox, one of the first things that comes up is like the notion that if you kill your grandfather or your parent or anybody in history when you go back in time, or you do something that leads to their death, then you will not have existed, which means you can't go back in time to kill them, which then closes in on itself, blah, 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 blah. The butterfly effect is basically where if you even exist in a different timeline, like in the past, then you're going to have cataclysmic effects on the timeline that you actually came from. And then the bootstrap paradox is rather nicely explained by this one episode of Doctor Who that came out in like 2015, 16. The idea that it's sort of like a stable time loop, but it's the idea that the originator of a particular event in time does not actually exist in the sense that we know of them. And in order for them to exist, there has to be a time loop. So like in this case, it's Celestia only exists because Twilight, at some point in time, Celestia does not know. The version of Twilight that she knows has to go back. It has to be like accidentally sent back in time before the princesses give birth to her by whatever means, and then become an element of harmony, which basically means that it's not like a I'm my own grandfather type thing. It's more like it's something similar to that, but like it's basically like the way it was well described that I remember is like you go back in time with all of Beethoven's works to get it signed by Beethoven, but you discover that in that time period, there is no Beethoven, nobody knows who the fuck this person is. So you realize, oh shit, if there's no Beethoven, then how are Beethoven's works going to be remembered through history so that my timeline isn't messed up? So you go ahead and recreate all of his stuff and get it published so that he lives on in history. But that means that now Beethoven only exists because somebody went back in time. And the same sort of thing is going on with Twilight and Celestia.
Speculative fiction is weird.
I think I've heard of this like paradox, although I never heard it called the Bootstrap Paradox. But like when Marty McFly goes back in time and plays Johnny Be Good, then and then his cousin Marvin, he calls up his cousin Marvin, who then presumably just like rips off that song wholesale, so Marty could in the future become like he'll become the originator of that song. Like who wrote that song to begin with? Then it's just who got the whole thing started.
Yeah, basically there is no real originator that you know of. It's just because of time travel that it exists. But then my major problem with the fic is really that there's a Twilight Sparkle from the present who goes back in time and becomes Celestia's mother and then disappears into an actual element of harmony. But then where did the present day Twilight come from?
I think that the present-day Twilight is still meant to have just been a random pony who was born because her ancestors were still in that time period. It was just the end of her life that was presupposed for back then. That one I don't see so much as a plot hole, because the physics of it do still work. The idea that Twilight has not yet been born, but then again, Cygnus has something to say, so maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, the Bootstrap Paradox in this instance, I think, would refer more to the elements of harmony rather than necessarily the characters. If in this instance they are the Beethoven work, the body of Beethoven's work, where did they originally come from if time travel had to occur for them to exist at all?
Okay. Illya?
Well, first of all, as you've said, Polydor Principans is a good writer, and I liked his writing style very well in the beginning of the story. I have no problems personally with time travel stories. City on the Edge of Forever was my favorite Star Trek episode, and The Voyage Home was my favorite movie. So I think time travel can be done well, and the idea that there are physics elements that can be explained, goes no further than unicorn horns and Pegasus wings. But that being said, from the very middle of the story, I would say, it began to pace so poorly that it just lost me. It started out with, whatever happened to Firebrand? They made friends with him, sort of, and he killed somebody and he disappeared. And that should have been explained. And then when Twilight has to begin to explain to her friends, oh, you're going to sacrifice yourself, you're going to die soon. That should have been extremely well fleshed out. That was a huge plot point to me. The sacrifice should not have been made lightly. I just saw that it was like Polydor Principans, he was riding along and suddenly, oh God, I'm late for an appointment. I'll finish this up. It was just nutty at the end. It was just like, oh, this, that, in the end. And that was my big problem with it.
Okay. So, moving on to characterization, particularly of Twilight, Celestia, and Luna. They are the three biggest players in this story to varying degrees. Neighrator, we're going to start with you. What do you think of the characterization? What's your story? You get to feckin' defend it. What do you think? What do you think of the characterization of these characters? Do they fit with canon interpretations? Bearing in mind this was written in 2013, right after Season 3 had concluded, but before Season 4 had started.
The first bit of this story, the attack on Canterlot, the old worm is climbing up the mountain, and it's got a description of all of Celestia's forces. The Royal Guard, the Army, and the Air Force are all just bombarding this this dragon, trying to stop it as best they can. That part was written exceptionally well. I thought that part was written from Celestia's perspective. I thought that all worked really well. Celestia was on point. Luna, briefly for her part, was on point. The story as a whole kind of took a turn after that very first scene. So, but in terms of characterization, it was all right, I think.
Goombasa?
I'm not really sure what to think of the characterization. Celestia and Luna, I actually think, are written pretty well in this instance. Twilight, I'm not so sure of, though. Twilight, I have a lot of problems with as the fic goes on, though it mostly relates to just how fast paced the last third or so of the story seems to be.
Illya?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that part about Twilight. I mean, she even described it herself as, oh, I shacked up with this pony, and that's not very Twilighty in my opinion.
No,
but
it's not.
I think all of the characters were portrayed fairly true to form, but they were portrayed so briefly that it's kind of hard to say. I still don't understand why Celestia can never tell Luna anything. That seems like a trope almost. Luna never knows a damn thing.
What would have been harmed by letting Luna in on all this?
That is a point that we're going to come to later. Cygnus, what do you think?
I agree. I really think that it was you either had the canon interpretations or generic baby ponies or baby mamas. There wasn't really much more to it than that.
Luna, who apparently doesn't know anything in this story.
What's that?
The fact that Luna is always kept in the dark, I kept having to, in my head, go, no, we're talking about canon Luna, not Luna here, Luna.
Name jokes.
Aha, yes!
Well, I mean, I agree with everyone else. Generally, I don't. I find it strange that Celestia would just keep Luna in the dark, especially given that, regardless of Twilight's characterization, she does ask her daughter to share it with Luna if she feels it's appropriate, and Celestia never does that. She just keeps this to herself, and I feel as though with the closeness of the two sisters, it doesn't make any sense to me. Twilight's character, my major problem with it is, well, there's the rando baby daddy, for one thing.
Yeah, what the fuck is that?
We'll get to
Hi,
that.
Goody.
There's the rando baby daddy, which doesn't really seem like her. The way she writes about him in her letter doesn't sound like the way that Twilight would write about a character that she had apparently been interested enough in to procreate with. If she's trying to be, if she and her friends are trying to be inconspicuous in this time, I find it difficult to imagine that she also would then just like randomly shack up with a pony, quote unquote, because it doesn't sound as though she's very emotionally attached to him at any point in the story, which doesn't really sound like a pony who is like, it doesn't sound like Twilight Sparkle for one thing, because
she gave his name only after he died.
And I've always gotten the impression from Twilight that she's much more about commitments. Like, she's got those 6 friends that she cares about deeply, but in this story, she's just like blasé about killing them off.
It did feel like there were missing scenes with this.
There were lots of missing scenes and she has very little conflict. Like, there's very little real conflict for Twilight Sparkle. Any conflict that could have been put into the story is just, it's written away because it doesn't immediately contribute to what the author is trying to do, which is apparently create some kind of narrative, some semblance of a narrative to explain the elements of Harmony's existence.
Thornquill?
As the characters are written, they're passable. They sound like the characters they're meant to represent. Rarity has, her typical more flowery lines. Twilight definitely lurches back and forth between sounding just totally blasé and where did these lines come from to sounding fairly Twilight-like. The problem I have is they are kind of wooden. The lines are constructed kind of like they were just pulled from a wiki quote page almost, and they don't really have much substance surrounding them. Because I guess it sounds like Fluttershy, but it sounds, I can only describe it as blocky. Like the wooden puppet of Fluttershy swings into place. It's like, I say a Fluttershy thing, I go away now. And they're just being tugged back and forth by the strings of what event happens to be happening in the story at the moment. And there's just not much substance behind how anyone is written to me. And Luna is the one that bugs me the most. Princess Luna, obviously, in how she's written.
Shots fired.
Over the top, Princess Luna is definitely a thing, because of how she was portrayed in season 2, just loudly declaring everything and stuff going over her head all the time. But this one is just so unbelievably over the top. The point where she storms into Celestia's room at one point is like, you did something without asking me. I'm going to summon battle armor and weapons in case the next thing you say doesn't convince me you're not Discord's puppet or something. She's just so fast, so over the top, and just with, again, no substance guiding her. I could not buy into Luna in this story at all.
I think what you've just said, especially regarding the idea of the wooden characterization of the ponies, very much hits on the head something I'd been trying to put into words prior to this podcast.
I'd like to be a tree.
Oh, God.
I can't believe I didn't make that joke. I'm sad now.
It's sort of like a couple of changelings went to boot camp, like a 2-day boot camp, trying to learn to act as the main six, but maybe got a C- on their final exams.
This is the season 6 finale. Shit. Those changelings who were trying to be the main six and not very good at it. Fuck. So in actual fact, it was changelings stepped back in time the whole time and they became the elements of harmony.
No more changeling fix yet, please.
Okay, then the mean six. It would give that episode a fucking purpose.
Shit.
God, things really have gone downhill since I stopped watching.
It was an episode that had so much promise, none of which was followed up on any other episode when it should have been. Yeah, sad face, but we're not ready.
Let's discuss that. Let's discuss that episode a different time.
I was going to say, this is something for another time, because that will just make me very sad and angry. Yeah, wooden characterization is a good way of putting it, that they do feel very... It feels like the author had certain character beats they had to hit to just designate which character was which. It's like, right, Twilight Sparkle likes books and has a lot of knowledge and is a princess and a unicorn. Celestia is wise and mysterious and loving, and Luna is quick to battle and quick to anger. Applejack is very family-oriented and likes Rarity. Rarity is into fashion and textiles, and that will be enough to keep her happy. Like, this...
And Fluttershy is deeply religious at some point for some reason. I don't know where that came from.
Apparently she becomes a space Buddhist.
She's a cult leader, just like in Friendship is Witchcraft. Either way, it felt very much like it was hitting character beats so that we knew these were these particular characters because we had no visual representation. So here's Applejack saying Applejacky things, doing Applejacky things, and we're moving on with the story now. And basically, for large stretches of this story, it felt like it could have been any pony playing these roles. It could have been an entire cast of background ponies, and there wasn't enough characterization to them for it to make any difference whatsoever to lose the main six.
It might have actually been better if they'd used background ponies. That would have been fun.
Maybe.
Hell, I would have been happy with changelings. Would have explained why they didn't act like the main six that well.
This is not a changeling fic. Let's get off of changelings.
Is this going to be another installment of We've Just Written a Better Fic?
The mean six changelings go back in time. Changeling wood creatures go back in time and discover friendship, like all the magic of friendship, all on their own, and then turn into the elements of harmony.
And then suddenly the secret of Celestia's reign is discovered. She's part changeling.
So
I guess that would make us the snarky seven.
Does that mean that one of them should have also given birth to Queen Chrysalis?
Oh God!
By this point, why the fuck not?
That actually I would have loved that. I would love that.
Somebody pick the three sisters for a future reading, please.
Everyone is related to everyone. We're in Star Wars now. GG, goodbye.
My God. Okay, but I was actually thinking about writing a fic where Chrysalis was actually the rebel sister of Luna and Celestia, like the original Princess of Love or some shit.
That would make sense. Right. Do we have anything more to say on characterization, or shall we move on to the quality of the writing? Because we kind of touched on that already, but it would be worth going to a bit more detail of why we think the quality of the writing is a bit various.
I'm ready to move on from characterization.
Okay, Neighrator, you get to talk about quality of the writing then.
I had considered doing a reading of this fic way back when. Like I think it was about the second fic I had considered reading. I think I actually got one started at some point, but at that time, to be honest, the kind of run-on sentences that the author is fond of, not even run-on sentences, just longer sentences, proved to be a stumbling block for me early on in my recording career. And so I just kind of tabled it. The writing itself, mechanically, is okay, aside from that one hilarious missing word in the description of all places. It was all right. So yeah, mechanically, I think it worked okay. That first scene, the attack on Canterlot, I thought was written pretty well. And then after that, not so much a problem with the story, with the writing itself. It's just kind of this. Not a lot happened after that.
Not a lot happened, and yet a lot happened. Yeah.
Exactly.
Illya, what would you like to say about it?
Well, I think I've already mentioned that I liked the style. There were a few odd things in there, like an awkward sentence where it said, Celestia also knew that he was also a little more than upset with her. Too many alsos. But mostly I like the writing style. And like I said, I would have also recorded it, but it fell apart. I mean, it's just, I'm not even sure that the prose was as pretty towards the end. It was almost like the sentences got shorter, the pacing got faster. It was just an amazing.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that noticed that. It would start off good, and it just kind of stopped. There was this crazy shift.
Like suddenly they just had an appointment and had to finish up the fic.
Exactly. I mean, I really feel like something like that happened here. I wish he would rewrite the story.
Goombasa, what do you think?
This story feels to me like a situation where the author started writing it with a lot of enthusiasm, because I do think the opening scene was actually very well done. It actually managed to grip me pretty well, at least until time travel was involved. But I honestly feel like this is an example of an author that started writing with a lot of enthusiasm, and then that enthusiasm just slowly started to chip away as they got further and further into the story. Like, they started to see that their ideas, they didn't really know how to convey the ideas properly. They didn't really know how to get to the point that they wanted the fic to end at. And so it just sort of became something that they just did to get it over with.
That makes a lot of sense, really.
Cygnus?
Yeah, I agree. You remember what I said last time about most fics that I read needing to either be 10,000 words shorter or 35,000 words longer? I think this falls into that category as well. I think this would have been really good.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, I think this would have been really good if it had been allowed to flesh itself out to, say, 50 or 75,000 words. But like Goombasa says, it just seems like the interest wasn't there on the part of the author.
Luna?
I'm going to agree with everyone else, with Cygnus particularly. I looked at, with those missing scenes, it's particularly noticeable that those missing scenes don't feel like just things that were cut out for expediency. They feel like they were missed opportunities.
Deliberately glossed over?
Deliberately glossed over, but they feel more like missed opportunities for actual storytelling, actual conflict and resolution. That is really the biggest part of why I was disappointed by this fic. Like, I read it, and I, like Goombasa, really liked the first scene with the old worm and the battle, and even the ending of that battle where Twilight and the rest of the main six suddenly disappear into who knows where. But after that, it does feel as though the energy flagged. Became very telly to me. Like, yeah, it did still show things, but it was sort of like the story itself became very telly. Instead of the characters coming to their own conclusions, everything was already laid out for them. It was like watching the narrative play out the very same paradox it was describing in the end.
Thornquill?
I think what this story was trying to go for, especially just from how it's presented as a description and all of that sort of thing, this story wanted to be very mythic, kind of in a J.R.R. Tolkien sense of recreating the feel of an ancient Greek or an ancient Anglo-Saxon myth. The problem is, that's a very difficult thing to do, and Tolkien pulled it off because he had decades and decades of scholarship in medieval and ancient times under his belt. I seriously doubt Ponydora had that same experience, and the problem is that this story wanted to focus very deeply on the characters involved. It wanted it to have an emotional connection between Twilight and Celestia, which doesn't fit very well with a mythic approach. So you kind of almost have these two clashing styles in this story, and neither of them went out because I don't think the author understood that those are two very different approaches.
I don't know, because there are epic stories that I really liked, like The Well of Pyrene, that make the epic, that actually integrate the epic and the personal very well. and actually make the epicness of the story seem that much more real by emphasizing how close it is to the characters at hand.
Yeah, you can do it. But I don't think that's what the author wanted for this one. And especially with how the story starts out, it feels like they wanted this very poetic, meandering, sort of rich and poetic sort of retelling of a mythic style, kind of from a distance back to get a huge grand scope of things. And I think that's where the beauty of the first couple of sections come in. They don't know how to maintain that and also maintain our interest at the same time, which is a difficult thing to do with these kind of more distanced mythic type of stories.
Illya, you've done quite a lot of these mythic world-building stories before. How do you think this one measures up to previous ones you've done, like More Precious Than Silver and Gold, or the one with the name escapes me with the Changeling Queen, in which Goombasa played Chrysalis?
Well, it's difficult to say other than repeating what I have said. I think that we don't want to discount what Thorny said here. That the beginning of this was beautifully written. And I mean, it was good enough that it really dragged me in and then beat the crap out of me later on. But I liked the entire premise. I liked everything about it, except the pace. It just fell apart. There were so many opportunities for so many beautiful things to have happened. Like Rarijack. What the hell was that? They had a relationship, but it wasn't romantic, but it was the deepest thing they'd ever experienced. We need a lot more in there for that. So I don't know. It was a confusing bit. It started out beautifully. So
I have that excerpt pulled up if I can just read that quickly, if you don't mind.
Do it.
Go ahead.
Oh, hey, at least you had me, Sugar Cube, Applejack replied. I know it wasn't what either of us dreamed, and I know there wasn't really nothing romantic about any of it, but, well, Applejack removed her hat and held it over her heart with a foreleg. You made something beautiful out of this ugly fate, Rare. You made it possible for me to get out of bed every morning and tend my crops. I don't know how or why, but in this crazy life, I guess it's fair to say that you turned out to be my soulmate. Rarity used her telekinesis to pull Applejack's hat away and placed it on top of her own head. Then pulled Applejack close to her and nuzzled against the orange mare's shoulder. You made it easy for me to find the good and beautiful, Applejack. So, totally shipping. They were actually living in the same house, but the author had to make it clear they're not lesing up because what? I'm a little confused by the inclusion of this.
WTF, really?
Like, it's like having Tolkien write Sam. It's like reading Lord of the Rings and that scene where Sam stares at Frodo and admits that he loves Frodo to himself, but then if immediately after he said, "Oh, but no homo."
No homo. I'm a little confused by the inclusion of that. Why was that necessary to include?
See, I hate Rarijack generally, unless it's Equestria Girls, where I think there's a basis in canon, much to my chagrin. But I fucking hate Rarijack, so immediately minus 10 out of 10 for that.
How dare you?
But it wasn't romantic. But it's not romantic at all. They made it clear.
Applejack said it's not romantic.
I just don't like it. And if any of you fuckers pick a Rarijack for next time, I will fucking murder you.
Do it.
Oh, don't worry.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, I don't know how it's challenge accepted. Your turn doesn't come up for another while yet.
Good, it gives me time to look for one.
Oh, shit. It's only Cygnus, Illya, and Luna I have to worry about.
Don't worry, I don't understand main six shipping generally, so...
Way! Okay, Goombasa has something to say.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, if we put the pairing to the side for a second, the fact that it comes right out of nowhere at the end with very little explanation, regardless of whether it's described to be romantic or not, it felt very out of place and very out of the blue for the type of story that this was supposed to be.
Yeah, kind of weird.
Yeah, I think to circle back to the quality of writing point, I think my view is that this is a very early and a very basic attempt at writing in a Tolkienian or a mythic style. As a result, the quality of writing in that style is very underdeveloped and not much understanding of what builds that style is present yet.
Which leads us nicely on to a point you added to the itinerary, Thorny. creating emotion in story, combat, conflict, and whether the characters seem to care about anything that's happening, and if they don't, do we? So, Thorny, you want to take this one away?
Okay, so yeah, this builds off of how I feel that the characters' performances are very wooden. And reading this story, I realized about halfway through that I was bored and wanted to switch tabs, which surprised me. And so I asked, okay, why am I bored? And I realized fairly quickly the characters very rarely, there are spots of it in there, but it's not nearly enough. They very rarely experience emotion and they very rarely show emotion. And as a result, they don't seem to care about anything that's happening around them. I mean, even in the first scene where Celestia is watching the worm climb the mountain, yeah, she's stoic because she knows what's going to happen, but she also just seems more detached than she should be about the whole thing. And that's because we don't get much insight into how this is affecting her emotionally. She's approaching the moment where her mother and prize student is going to disappear from her life forever. This should be ripping her soul up from the inside out. This should be causing her physical pain as she tries to hide it. And we never see anything like that in the whole story. It goes back to also how Twilight gets married, has children, her husband dies, and we never see any of that. And from her, the way she describes it is about as eventful and impactful as watching a cloud roll by on a lazy summer afternoon. If none of that is present, then it's not impacting the characters. And if the characters aren't being impacted, we're not being impacted as readers. This goes into writing combat for fantasy, which actually factors out into this whole story since it has a combat scene and it lacks this component for the whole story. A lot of new writers, when they try to write combat, basically try to describe a kung fu movie or something. They will say, so-and-so did this, and then he ducked, and then he went into this form, and he did this. And they will list off event after event after event, and not once do we see how it impacts the character. We don't see whether they care, we don't see whether they're scared, whether they're surprised, whether they're confident, whether they're laughing, anything like that. And this blows out to this whole story. I feel that it is a sequence of events, not a series of experiences.
Neighrator, how do you feel about that? Also, apologies that there's somebody setting off bloody fireworks right above me.
Fireworks? What?
It was bonfire night a little while ago.
Right.
And I think it's still Diwali. We have a lot of fireworks because there's a rugby club nearby that just always setting off fireworks. But anyway, Neighrator, what do you think about what Thornquill has just said?
Yeah. Just kind of dry overall, especially like that scene we're talking about towards the beginning where all their friends are dying, and there was a little bit, there was a little bit, we saw just a tiniest bit of like the emotion and stuff that they were going through, and Rainbow Dash was trying to be stoic and stuff like that, and Fluttershy, but yeah, by and large, just we're all gonna commit like group suicide, and everybody's just kind of okay, that's a thing to do. We presume that Twilight has told them this in advance. And they've kind of come to grips with their, the fact that they're all going to die essentially. That really should have been. We should have seen that though. Yeah, just I didn't feel much of a connection to the characters at all, or what they were going through.
Luna?
Absolutely agree with NP. I think that everything that could have been emotional for the story was cut out of it or not written in at all. And it would have been served better as like a multi-chapter, maybe 60,000, 75,000 word fic, where we got to see those things and got to see the characters agonizing over this stuff and living their lives and having their babies, and not just like having the baby daddy in the background existing to procreate and then die like so many drones in beehives, but actually seeing how his relationship with Twilight develops. From the way that Twilight and Rarity talk about the group suicide, it sounds as though nobody else in the group yet knows, and yet Rarity is like the first one to know about this, and it might even be one of her like first times even hearing about it, and she's totally okay with it. And it's like, boy, are you on drugs? I admit that like the particular lines that they said did tug at the heartstrings a little bit, but I have read fics before where I cried, and yet I knew that I did not like the story itself because I did not like how it was written at all. And unfortunately, this is one of those, I don't dislike it, but this is one of those stories where I do not resonate with the characters, even though I do, it did succeed in pulling some emotions out of me.
You cried because you'll never get that time back.
Oof. Oof. All of the oof.
I apologize. That one was mean-spirited. I'm sorry.
Wow, Goombasa, who knew you were going to be queen bitch of this podcast?
Oh, Lord.
Thank you, Goombasa. At least it's not me.
I want fan art of that. Make me queen bitch.
Yes.
I'm just going to put it in the description. Previously you were the green godly one, now you're queen bitch.
Oh my god.
Well, all right then.
Illya, what do you think?
Well, actually, I believe I have the entire canon figured out in a way that makes perfect sense.
Ooh.
In the modern era, Celestia had managed to round up and destroy all of the marijuana in Equestria. But
Oh, no.
in the olden days, it was readily and freely available to everyone.
This is going places.
When they went back and passed, they became stoned. And they stayed that way the entire time.
So these were
my
like
God.
5 prayer meetings.
Fluttershy joined a cult, and then I think that Rarity and Applejack found something a little stronger. And they just sort of stayed in a fog, a fog that they weren't able to explain properly, but nevertheless made them feel quite well. So I believe that is
So,
exactly what
Everyone
happened.
just took PCP at when they had to go and
I was wrong all along. The characters weren't wooden, they're stone!
And thus we have another episode of We Accidentally Wrote a Better Story.
I knew it was coming.
To be honest, the rest
Okay.
of the podcast seems a bit like we shouldn't really go on with it, because I don't think we're going to beat that. I think we've peaked.
Good night, everybody.
And suddenly Neighrator became Yakko Warner. Right. Okay, and that Thornquill gets to take this one again because he's added it to the itinerary. Closely related to previous, he acknowledges, character agency versus passivity and plot versus character-driven stories. Is this a good example of either, or lacking in both? Donnie!
I think it's been established that the characters don't really seem to care very much about what's going on. And what really exemplifies this is the moment when Twilight gives up trying to find a time spell that'll take them home, and through events, I'm actually not quite sure how she came to this realization, now that I think about it, decides that they must all kill themselves, pour their spirits into the elements, so that the elements can be there for Celestia and Luna. They come to this conclusion, and what really shocked me in the story was that it turned to that in about the space of 1 or 2 sentences. And I was thinking, well, this escalated quickly. It's like, oh, we've gone from having to just live a quiet life to now we must die. And the problem is they don't care about anything that happens to them. They just react to each event of the story as it happens to drift along and carry them down the river of the story with it. And the biggest problem is every one of these characters, to me, feels so passive. They never try to fight against their circumstances. They show up, they do something obligatory, and then they just kind of go with whatever the result is. An exception of this is that we are told, we don't see, which would have been a nice series of struggle and despair if we had seen Twilight trying to develop this time spell and get them home, but we're just told that she does it and eventually gives up. But that is literally it. No one argues. Also, I'm hearing like someone beating the shit out of their keyboard.
If I had to venture a guess, I would say Scribbler has got like space bar bound to her push to talk key, and so we're hearing only the space bar as she's typing.
Sorry.
It's
Yes.
true.
To get stoned like the characters.
I can stop caring.
I do have some chocolate left over from Vegas if you'd like some.
Oh gosh, no, that's not.
But yeah, so these characters are very passive. Rainbow, Fluttershy, no one tries to say, well, maybe we should try to find another way, or maybe we should fight Discord with Celestia and Luna, or maybe we should just not kill ourselves until we're older or something. I don't know.
Sorry, it's just, I had a mental image then. Maybe we should fight with Celestia and Luna. Just imagine them picking up these foals and beating Discord to death with them.
Celestia never tries to alter the outcome. It is all hinged this trope that Twilight has realized. It's all set in stone. We can't change anything. And no one tries to change anything. And again, the characters are so boring because they have no agency. They have no control over their world. They never try to have control over their world. And if you do that, there is no reason for us to be excited or in suspense about anything.
Oh my god, so that's why it's called Que Sera Sera.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about
There
that.
is a section
Title
later when
drops.
we talk about the title, so just hold fast, darlings.
Oh,
Narrator,
wow.
right?
Yeah, I'll go next.
Do you want to follow up on what Thorny's just said?
Well, Thorny Goombasa blew my mind just now because Que Sera Sera, because I was like, well, I don't have any say in anything that happens, I guess. So I'm a character apparently. Sorry.
Did this just become Stranger Than Fiction, that Will Ferrell movie where somebody's constantly trying to narrate him to death?
Yeah. All right. So this is this is pretty much a perfect example of the what I was talking about in the Them's Writin' Word panel that we did at BronyCon. But yeah, character agency, like these everyone in this story is just kind of being, swept along like in a like a river, and they have really no say about where the story goes. Part of the problem is, perhaps the nature of the story, that it involves time travel and predeterminism and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you're just kind of watching these characters just go along and say, well, apparently this is happening up to and including like everyone has to die. It's like, oh well, you had a good run, I guess. Let's everybody commit suicide now. So yeah, character agency. This is a perfect example of a story that does not do it very well.
Luna?
I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb and say that I think the story tries to give the impression of agency, but fails. And given what everybody else has said about it, I don't know if I have much else to say. Thornquill mentioned that it was it Thornquill, I think, about the mythic narrative?
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Yes,
I think in that sense, I think the lack of agency was written in because the author maybe thought that that's what a mythic narrative involves. Like, it's not about the characters, or it's not about really about their struggles. It's about the myth itself. And so that
fate
and that belief ends up, because of that belief, the story ends up sacrificing any real meaningful connection with the characters, any meaningful struggles for this notion of what a mythic story is supposed to look like.
Illya, you have any follow-up?
Not much. It was the agency was employed in odd ways. Right in the very beginning, when they first got to the old time, they were talking about, we need to stay undercover and not do anything to bring any attention to anything. And Rainbow Dash runs out and does a sonic rainbow. What? That's like, I expected something to come of that, actually. I mean, in the modern time, when he did that, it created all sorts of strange changes in the world for the main six. I thought, well, here's where we're going to see something, but it just turned out to be a random rainbow. Big deal.
Now, everyone, we need to move out into the countryside so we don't affect the timeline too much. But also, let's make sonic rainbows that apparently dissipate over the entire continent and also have a bunch of kids.
Yeah, so no, I don't have much to add to that.
I kind of feel like this is a story that tries to do both, but never really reaches the point where it does either very well. At least in terms of agency versus passivity and plot versus character-driven story. It feels like a weird combination of both at times. And again, I think it comes back to how the story starts with a lot of enthusiasm, and all of that slowly gets chipped away to the point where there's just nothing left by the end. I really don't know what kind of voice the story was trying to have by the end of it.
Cygnus?
Well, I suppose that's a good question. I remember, Illya, you pointed out the distinction between this and something like City on the Edge of Forever. And I think that that's actually a really good one to make for this particular point, if for no other reason than you do have that distinction in not just agency, but the appearance of agency, right? I mean, you've got Kirk, Spock, and McCoy in City on the Edge of Forever going through and philosophizing about this and thinking through the repercussions and generally doing value judgments on what they may or may not end up having to do by the end of the episode. And none of that is really present here. I don't know, maybe this is just a me thing, but I've always loved that part of the fan fiction more than just about anything else, is seeing how the characters are supposed to react based on their canon, semi-canon personas to the things that they are encountering in the various situations that they end up in. And this just was not present here. There was no continuity of thought. There was no continuity of anything other than this semi-tragic fainting and faintness of, rarity fainting. I don't know what the exact word is, but you know what I mean, over the whole heroic sacrifice and what have you. And it was not very fulfilling.
For my part, I don't have any particularly strong feelings on this that haven't already been said by everybody else. So it would be rather repetitive for me to say anything other than I think that this contributed to the idea of the story being quite boring. The idea of the characters are very passive when they should be active, and all the active moments seem to be off stage, so to speak. It would have been far more interesting if we'd had more active moments rather than passive ones where we could see them. If this was a particular effect that the author was going for, I can't see to what end it would serve, but it feels like it was a conscious decision to leave out all of the significant moments. I would be interested to know why and what their justification for that was. Does anybody have anything else they would like to say on this before we move on to the next point?
I do.
Take it away, Illya.
Going back to what Cygnus said about the City on the Edge of Forever, one of the most beautiful parts of that entire episode was at the very end, where there was the big conflict of whether they should save Edith Keeler or not. And there was a fight and Kirk had to be physically withheld from saving her. It would have just been a wonderful thing to have added to the end if they had put up, someone in the group had put up a fight against the sacrifice, and they'd had to win them over to the side. That would have been a perfect place for something like that. And I think it was a missed opportunity.
I must admit, I agree with you on that. That I did feel like one of the characters, like Remo Dash at the very least,
Exactly.
or if they had this magical, wonderful, romantic, not really romantic because no gay connection between Rarity and Applejack, maybe one of them would have fought for the other one to not die.
Perfect.
Perfect, yes.
Or, you could have even done it with Fluttershy and her whole religious cult business. She suddenly becomes so attached to the world that she doesn't want to leave it anymore, or sees it as heretical or something equally exciting. But no, we didn't have anything.
Or Pinky doesn't want to leave her babies because apparently she had some too. She popped out a bab.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, apparently it was so significant we all fucking forgot that that Pinky popped out a baby.
She was awfully chipper about orphaning her own children, wasn't she?
Do we even know who the father was of hers?
No, we don't know who the father of Celestia and Luna are. Why would we know who her father is?
No, they both just had random baby daddy hive drone fathers.
We do know that Twilight's at least had a name. His name was Morningstar. Pinky, I don't think we even got the father's name.
Wasn't Morningstar the one they rescued from the pit?
No, that was Morning Glory.
Oh.
Like, they literally just had, apparently, stallions in this universe are just hive drones.
Whoa. We need to talk about that right
Question.
now.
What's the it's called the Bell Deck test, right? When you have
Bechdel.
Bechdels. Oh, thank you so much. So sorry. Where the litmus test is there two female characters in the story who have an interaction who talk about something other than the male character? I think this fails the reverse test.
Yeah.
Well
It
said.
just failed the reverse Bechdel, where they talk about everything except the male characters.
Goodness me.
Although they do talk about the assassin pony.
Yeah, but he doesn't interact with any other male characters, and that's the reverse Bechdel right there.
Oh, you're right.
You're right.
There's literally nothing about Firebrand. That could have been an interesting story thread, and it was completely ignored.
Absolutely.
I'm just noticing that just now.
You're right. The male characters never interact with each other, ever. Wow. Not even Spike with any of the male ponies.
You might give the fic a pass just because it's My Little Pony and all the characters are female for the most part.
Maybe, but when you've plopped in a load of OCs, you could have probably... Morning Glory did not need to be female. Morning Glory did not need to be called Morning Glory, to be perfectly honest. Can we get this out of the way that I fucking hate that name?
Of course we were going to bring this up.
It's a fucking flower.
It might be a flower, it was also a G1 pony, and it was silly back then too.
It's also a boner.
That they fucking knew what they were doing. The people who were working on G1 thought, this is a really girly show, we hate working on it, let's slip in a dick joke. And to be perfectly honest, I'm hoping, because Ponydora Prantypants likes G1, has shown like G1 in other stories, I'm really hoping it was a reference to that G1. Otherwise, I have to assume that somehow there was a random penis joke in the middle of this emotional roller coaster of Twilight and the inevitability of her own death.
You're just watching G5, one of the main characters is going to be Morning Glory.
Hold on, so is Morning Glory another word for morning wood? I am completely confused right now.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly.
it is.
It's the perfect name for this character, you see, because that's the only thing that he contributes to the story. His seed from which that he uses to sire the princesses of the whole universe, and that's his only role in this story, is to just kind of be a baby's daddy who provided a little man juice.
Hive drones.
To be honest, ponies are
Fucking
always
hell.
named after their special talent, aren't they? Their name always has something to do with it, so that
It's
really does beg the
perfect.
question. Morning Star is now hereby swapped names with Morning Glory. So they pulled Morning Star out of a pit, and Morning Glory is the baby daddy.
I am face palming over this whole fucking conversation so hard, you have no idea.
It's perfect.
You may
Should-
face palm, but we know we're right.
Should we start playing the Reflex?
Pardon?
You've never heard the song The Reflex?
No.
Nice.
The whole joke about it is that it's rumored to be about an erection.
Okay,
It's
I am
perfect.
going to circle. I am going to circle
Moving
around
on from
quite
penises.
despondently at this point, back to the idea of character agency.
The males have no agency, the females have limited agency because
Well,
we're
there's
all
that,
destined to
but-
fucking die.
So the takeaway I kind of wanted people to have as a way to avoid this story's mistakes, because they are big ones to avoid. You do not want your story to be boring. You can make a lot of mistakes, but that is not one of them. And in any story, characters will be reactive. They are going to react to something that happens to them. But it's almost always a good thing if they're also sometimes proactive. They have to make events happen. And in this story, they never do. I'm going to use another Tolkien example because that's what's in my head now. But take Frodo at the Council of Elrond. Everyone has all these different ideas of what to do with the ring, and all it is chaos. And Frodo makes the choice that he's going to, frankly, shut all these people the hell up. He gets some peace and quiet. He's going to do what he does not want to do. He's going to reject his own emotional conflict, and he's going to take the ring. He's going to keep taking it on this perilous journey. And that one choice immediately coalesces and focuses the whole council, and the entire story revolves around that decision. That is a character making something happen, not just allowing something to happen to them. And kind of the only other point that we didn't discuss on this, and I think someone else should explain it better than me because I don't really have a great way to explain the difference. But this does touch on the issue of character-driven stories versus plot-driven stories. And character-driven stories are very much on this sort of note. They involve characters making things happen. Whereas in plot-driven stories, you can get away with a lot more of characters just reacting to things happening. I think some examples of these are like heist stories. You just have characters with expertise reacting to thing going wrong after thing going wrong. But I was kind of interested in hearing everyone else's thoughts on, is this actually just a good plot-driven story and I just don't like it?
Nah.
Cygnus, you want to take this one? Your voice was heard first, so you get to field it.
Yeah, all right. No, I think that you've got a very good point going there, Thorny. I think I've always heard it referred to as the difference between character-driven and world-driven stories, but I suppose the distinction between that and plot is a little bit less obvious than between that and characters. No, I don't think that the overarching plot is any more concrete or capable of supporting the story than anything else. I think that the ideas are there, and I think, as we've been saying, the enthusiasm wasn't. And if we're going to do anything in terms of writing advice, I think that has to be probably point number one, is don't get bored with your story and then post it. If you're going to get bored, then either scrap it or save it for another time, but don't inflict it on the world if you're not ready to back it up and bring your best to it, really. Which it just didn't really feel like it was.
Well, I think that the Blue Pony would say that Twilight's plot was the thing that moved the story along.
Illya, why are you hurting me?
I knew there was a reason we invited him to be in this podcast.
Can we keep him?
Goodness.
Does anybody want to follow up on this?
I'm good, actually. I think Thorny said it all.
I think that's a good note to leave that particular topic on.
We must ask the green question.
Goody, how you feeling about green right now?
Oh my god. So, all right. I have not read the story y'all have been discussing, but that said, how many words was this?
15,000-ish?
15,000.
15,000? I find it really hard to believe that all of this happens in the span of 15,000 words. Like, what the hell, man? That's a lot.
I think that's everyone's point, really.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm getting overwhelmed with info here. I feel like I'm being told, like, the SparkNotes version of Lord of the Rings before watching the final fight at Mordor.
Honestly, yeah, that kind of just sums up the problem with the story. It's an info dump.
Contributing!
Well done, Goody.
The wild Goody appears. Right, so, moving on to the next point then.
I think it says something about the story when someone who hasn't read it understands it better than the ones who did.
And summed it up perfectly.
Yep, but is it better than green?
I mean, I still haven't finished that because I quit it. And I don't just quit stories out of the blue. I'm not about to interrupt this podcast with the rant that everybody knows about.
Someday we will just plant a microphone in front of you and let you rant and then just post the entire thing unfiltered onto YouTube.
I really hope Steele isn't listening to this right now.
Criticism is something that comes with the public. Yeah, all of us in this chat have been treated to some pretty fucking harsh criticisms by our critics.
Yes,
if
we
I
have.
was to compare some of the stipulations of green to some of the stuff that I've heard at least in terms of the shipping I've been hearing about, I'm not a fan of just out of the blue shipping. Like, you know, if characters, especially canon ones, are an item, you gotta make a little explanation for it. You gotta show like why they're a thing, what exactly led to the moment of this being relevant to bring up. One of my favorite stories, like action-based stories, the Immortal Game. Just threw Rarajack in, just shoehorned Rarajack in at the tail end of the final conflict out of nowhere. I never really kind of forgave it for it, so I guess that's my 2 cents and 3/4. I don't know.
Righty tight. So we'll move on to next point. This is Luna's point. So you're going to take us off on this one, Luna. Theory/speculation on Celestia's grand vision/greater knowledge, especially but not limited to Twilight. How does this compare to other fanfics that explore the topic and the show? So, Luna.
I wrote this point down when I was like in the middle of the fic, and I was curious mainly about what this fic does in terms of lifting the veil on Celestia's mysterious nature, why she seems to know so much about the world that she's not telling, and particularly regarding Twilight. And I was wanting to go a bit more into like how we feel about how this was done by this particular fic, particularly because I think this is possibly the most cliche way it could have been done that I've ever read. In terms of like, okay, we'll take an existing character, and the whole reason that she's important to, the whole reason that Celestia has this hidden knowledge about this character has nothing to do with like her being a godlike figure or something, which is also fairly common, and not because she like has maybe some mystical understanding of how things are going to go, or she has this grand plan, but because this character is her time-traveling mother.
That sounds so weird when summed up like that.
And that's this is this person's notion of how to basically, I guess, lift the curtain on the man, like, this is how they decide to have us pay attention to the man behind the curtain, by having the thing behind the curtain be so absolutely mundane that it's disappointing. Because I also have read stuff like Cygnus's fanfictions, which go into which hint at like a different sort of notion that Celestia and Luna are like godlike figures, and they do have this greater plan for the ponies that they rule and serve. That
Why are you atting me? I'm right here.
What? No, I'm standing you.
What?
I feel like I'm out of the loop here.
Me too.
As am I.
Explain,
Sorry.
please.
No, we just have an ongoing joke about her recommending my things to everyone that she can get her hooves on, and I need her to
inside
stop
jokes.
it.
I see.
Right, that makes way more
rest
sense.
of us aren't privy to, but all right.
Well, this kind of happened last time where I ended up putting in the description of the video a link to your story after you explicitly told me not to.
Yeah, I'm not going to name his fics so that we don't have to do this time, but like they just have a general theme of like not necessarily lifting the curtain on Luna and Celestia, but like exploring the notion of why Celestia is so mysterious and yet seems to know so much in a different way that I honestly feel is more satisfying because it's not explored in infinitesimal detail, but rather given to the reader to deduce for themselves. And this feels more like the person wants to know everything, has decided, okay, I want to know why Celestia is this way, why she knows this stuff, why she has this plan for Twilight, and why Twilight in particular, and has decided, well, it must be time travel.
The question...
You do realise, of course, that I am going to be putting a link to Cygnus's fanfiction
God
in the
damn it.
description. Just in general. If you won't name a fic, I'll just give them all the fics. Goombasa, you have something to say?
I was just thinking on that point about Celestia being so mysterious and having this grand vision, and it made me realize I kind of prefer it when authors don't really try to give it any sort of, like, omniscience, but rather just make Celestia into some pony who just flies the seat of her pants and just makes stuff up as she goes along and hopes that it works out. Now, obviously, that's not what happens in this fic, but I prefer it when she's portrayed that way, where she doesn't have a grand vision, and she's much more reactionary, but she pretends like it's going to plan, which I believe was a bit of a joke in the early fandom, especially when more threats started to roll around.
I totally meant to do that. All ponies love me. Yeah, I kind of like that iteration of Celestia too. To be honest, early fandom is just a wealth of interesting ideas that have been slowly whittled away by canon.
Yeah.
This is very true, yes.
That might be why we have chosen almost universally stories written before 2015 for these podcasts.
And look how much we've
Look
loved
at gay deer.
Oh, shush! Stop
Okay, honestly.
poking holes in
God
my
damn it.
logic.
That's how we get gay deer changelings.
Oh, fuck you with your pastel fucking bugs.
Well said.
And on that note,
And on that note, yes, would anybody like to add something to this idea? Follow up on what Luna's just said? Or should we just, like, big up Cygnus for a little bit longer?
I actually like the idea because you have so much of this Celestia mysterious thing, which I like. That's my preferred method too, but it's fun once in a while to say, okay, well, here's one idea. But once again, failed from being poorly explained. There's this interesting thing that happens right at the end of the thing where suddenly everybody disappears and suddenly Luna and Celestia turn into omniscient beings, apparently. I thought that was especially noted in the last sentence of the story where it said the two princesses did not cry. There's something happened right there. Something turned them into something special.
I'm guessing it was the elements of harmony somehow. I think
That's all we got.
big beef with this story is the fact that, yes, a thing like this, I'm kind of a fan of keeping Celestia mysterious and keeping us more in the dark about what her motives and her interests and her goals are. In that sense, it's difficult to write a story about what it would be if we knew more about what's going on in her head without it being disappointing. I do believe it can be done, and I think that this fic sort of fell short in the way that it told its iteration of how that could go.
I will say, I did like the concept, and I think I'm with everyone else that I didn't like the execution as much. I liked that Celestia had some foreknowledge from Twilight of how certain things would go. I actually really liked how that fit into how Celestia sent her to Ponyville and just disappeared on the night of Nightmare Moon's return. And just her whole attitude was that she did know how things were going to turn out. And I liked how it was written in that scene where she's stargazing with Twilight, where Celestia explains she knows some things and she leaves that mysterious to Twilight. That she still doesn't know everything, or she's relying on other sources for some other things. I did really like that point. I don't like the point that it also involves her knowing that Twilight, her mother, is going to get Thanos away right in front of her when she's a tiny child and turn into a star or something. That is much less poignant. I kind of like the idea that that this explains part, maybe not all, of Celestia's knowledge.
So our next point is, again, one from Luna. Oh, so Luna, you get...
Sorry. I was just sort of going along and there was this...
No, it's fine. To be honest, it's fine by me. It's more that you keep having to justify them. It's like, right, who's starting us again? Luna! Switches in perspective/time. Are they timed effectively for the narrative? Does anything feel ambiguous that will be better clarified? And do the switches maintain a good balance of tension and narrative flow? So, Luna.
Okay, so I also wrote this point while I was getting towards the end of the fic, and at the time that I was first reading it, I thought, well, this isn't really that terrible. I have seen this sort of perspective switch thing done better. I definitely don't feel the same level of tension between them as I did with, say, Peaceable Kingdom. Sorry, Cygnus.
You stop it! You stop that! You bad person!
Totally going in the description.
Woo!
You've named a fic, it's gone in the description.
Again. 2 weeks in a row. It's a Streisand effect.
I'm so...
What is the Streisand effect?
Sorry.
It's a Streisand effect is when you try to hide something and by virtue of doing so bring it even more prominently to the fore.
Like her nose? Is that why that's called that?
She's a very private person, apparently.
Oh.
She's tried to suppress some pictures from her beach house from being released to the public. No one knew her particular beach house, which one was hers, but then after the lawsuit, when everything was public record, now everyone knows where her beach house is.
Right, okay, and there was I just thinking that like she tried to make her nose look small.
No.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay, moving on after Scribbler's had her apparent... I fully expect to have a comment somewhere calling me a racist for that one. Moving on from Scribbler's faux pas. Luna?
I forgot what I was going to add. I think it was just that I realized during the course of this discussion that this point probably doesn't have as much relevance anymore because we discussed most of why things like the writing of the story doesn't maintain very good tension, why things like what was brought up by this point don't have the impact that I think they were intended to, and it's not because of those perspective switches themselves, it's because of how wooden and dry the story generally is and how lacking in how meaningless any character's limited emotion and agency feels, which is more of a problem of the story overall rather than this particular bit.
Cygnus, would you like to rebut?
Not really. I will say, though, that I think this goes back to Thorny's point about the relative wooden puppet feel to the characters. That, again, they just are kind of there and dance on their strings for a moment, and then we're back to whatever we needed to go to next.
Puppet to her fame.
Knew that was coming.
Yep, it's me. Of course it's going to be a random off to scratch. This is just my thing. Illya, you would like to add away.
I don't like time shifts. I don't enjoy them. It had to be done to a certain extent in this story because of the way it was written. But they added a third timeline that just threw me off every time I read it. Took me right out of the story, and I didn't appreciate that.
That felt very haphazard.
It can be done. It can be done very effectively, like in your story Vampirelance. We know to expect it. It's good. It's important to the story. But in this one, I always felt like they threw in a couple of misplaced timelines that didn't belong.
And those just came in out of nowhere, so it felt like a very stitched together sort of patchwork of storylines / perspectives.
I must admit, I do think that if you're going to do something like that, it needs to be parallel timelines. And I'm not tooting my own trumpet, but thank you for bringing up Vampirelance, Illya. The idea in that is that present and past do run parallel to each other, so that for ease of the reader, if nothing else. And yes, I must agree, this story, I did have trouble tracking at some points where in the timeline we were in the story. And I think reordering of some scenes might have been in order to achieve that. Maybe have a sort of prologue, epilogue piece, rather than it be letters, have it be the moment that Twilight disappears and the worm be the prologue-y scene, and then the rest of it run in parallel timelines.
Yeah, I do enjoy split timeline or like a scattered scene, just approaching the timeline randomly more than I definitely used to. But you're right, this one does feel very randomly woven together. I think part of that is that when you choose not to do a linear story, when you split up the timeline into scenes that are scattered around, you do so to keep dramatic tension linear and to control what information you reveal and when the type of story that you're writing doesn't necessarily work in a linear fashion. The problem with this story is that we kind of go into it knowing almost everything that happens. We don't know that the elements, that the main six will have to kill themselves to become the elements, but we do know that Twilight is Celestia's mother, and we get the general sense of what's happening very early on. So the scattered scenes don't really have much to do. They don't add anything to our understanding of what's happened. I think it would have been much more powerful if the story held more back and gave us a slow reveal of, oh, this is the kind of time travel story we're getting. Actually, the main six who have been guiding the events that also guided them later. Now, it wouldn't fix everyone's complaints about that if you don't like that kind of story, but at least it would keep dramatic tension up. We should have had a slow reveal that Twilight was Celestia's mother. That's the big twist, and we go in knowing it. So all that we experience through all these scenes is just explanation.
Well, it's further complicated by the fact that they throw in letters, which you have to figure out where the timeline is for the letter when you start reading it.
Yeah, I forgot about that. This also throws in an epistolary narrative style. So you're switching perspectives. You're switching from character to character. You're switching time periods, and you're switching writing style, your narration style. I'm not saying you can't do that, but certainly in this story, it feels like one switch up too many.
Actually, out of curiosity, do we think that this would have been improved? And again, Thorny, along the lines of what you were saying about revealing the operative bit at the end, do we think this would have been improved by being an epistolary story, purely?
I think it could have been, honestly.
I think so. I certainly think so.
Could have been. Quite possible, yeah.
Well, at least just by sticking to one story style rather than trying to jump between them.
That's a good idea.
One of the strengths of epistolary feeds very well into the mythic feel, actually. With epistolary, you can feel like you are assembling a lost or forgotten history. You, as the reader, are kind of doing an archaeological dig and putting all of these little fragments of history together. That could have worked very well for this story.
That's a wonderful idea.
Or just write it like the epistles book of the Bible.
To me, it felt like every jump back to the present, it didn't do very much except sort of just explain, sort of attempt to reconcile all the plot points that we had. I'm trying to say it was all just for very just sort of explanatory, as opposed to, there's no emotional impact about anything that happened once we're back in the present day.
I agree. I think that the emotional impact of this story was severely lacking. I do think that an epistolary approach might have fixed that. It certainly would have given the characters more voice, rather than have them be background figures in their own story. Okay, our next point was suggested by Illya. Could we have a bit more story involved in Twilight revealing the fates of her companions to them? If ever any of the story invoked que sera sera, then their casual acceptance of their fates did. It seems it would have been a good place to explore characterization. Illya?
Yeah, I think it was something that the author really missed an opportunity for. I'm all about exploring the inner workings of the minds and feelings of the characters. I mean, I just love that part of any story. And here we had a chance. We had some serious conflict, and we could have gone from character to character, and then we could have had the entire set of characters together, and it could have taken another 15,000 words, and it would have been just a wonderful addition to the story. I miss it.
Absolutely.
And just imagine if Twilight's husband/baby daddy were still alive, how much emotion you could wring out of that if she had to explain to him that she had to die.
Or if she has to watch him die.
Yeah, maybe Discord should have taken him.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine also a sequence where, like, Twilight, like maybe a sequence of events, perhaps broken up a little bit, in which Twilight gradually discovers, with increasing horror, that she has to do this.
Yes, seriously.
Very good.
Just about anything, to be honest.
Well, apart from her casual acceptance of Celestia and Luna being Celestia and Luna is a sudden gasp. And that's it. It's like, you have just discovered that your mentor, the figure to whom you have looked up to most of your life, whom you have spent the remainder of your life trying to get back to, did in fact spring forth from your own loins. And the most exploration we're going to get of this is a gasp.
After a one-night stand, no less.
As far as we know.
Well, apparently a two-night stand at least, because there's two of them. Unless we have another Project HS going on here.
I get it. They're twins. And Celestia has just always fooled Luna into thinking they weren't.
Celestia aged herself upwards by stealing the life from Luna.
No wonder she's shorter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my
and
God.
bitter.
We just flat out needed relationships in this story, and we needed to see those relationships play out, and we needed to see them conflict with each other. We needed to see characters wanting different things and that conflicting each other. We needed to see characters doing something or feeling something.
Well, we had lots of them doing something, but feeling something, certainly.
I honestly argue that they didn't even do anything.
Like I said, drugs.
Could have been 15,000 words longer.
They
It could
did
have been
something.
150,000 words longer. There is so much potential to explore so many different facets of what could have been a really heartbreaking and poetic tragedy. And we got none of that.
An exploration of predeterminism and so on. Yeah, there's a lot of room. Could have made a...
Would have been like a very nice thing for them to come to accept que sera after
Yes.
struggling with it.
They invented the phrase.
Yeah. A lot of missed opportunities in this fic, I think.
This is definitely a case of the Them's Writing Words podcast just keep rewriting the fic into a better version of itself.
That has to be episode 3 now.
I honestly hope this is one of the times where the author does not find the podcast.
I hope
Because I really like Ponydora Prancy Pants's work. Like, I really like it.
He's
It's one of
really
my
good.
favourite stories, but just not this one.
I thought I still like the fic. I'm one of those people, like, it's, you know, I can look at the story's faults and then still enjoy it, just like with Bonafide.
I like what this fic was trying to do more than what it actually did.
It is also important to remember that just because an author has one or two duds, that doesn't invalidate all of the other great
Absolutely.
ones that they do. I guess I just really hope that Prancy Pants does not have an especially emotional attachment to this particular story.
No hard feelings, Prancy Pants.
We're sorry. We really like you. We didn't like this story.
Here's an opportunity for author adulation. I'd never heard of this person before I was asked to read this fic. So give me recommendations. What of their other work should I read?
I actually did Ghosts. I thought it was very good.
Oh, that's right, Ghosts.
Yeah, there's a reason why I had Ghosts on the back burner for a very long time, because Illya went and did it. I'm going to find it. Hang on, 1 second. Pause. Can we have some elevator music, please, people?
Oh no.
Bloop, 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 bloop,
Oh, no.
bloop.
He's fighting a boss in Fallout New Vegas.
I thought he was just burning green to the ground every time I hear that in the background.
Yep.
Incidentally, while we were talking about that, I looked up the offending fic. 500,000 fucking words of just, what, Rarishai? Is that it?
Of randomly pairing up the main 6 on very shallow grounds that don't really go that well explored, and which involves some really weird, completely unexplained romantic scenes that feel like they're trying to tell you this is romantic rather than actually making it meaningful and interesting.
Well, based on that description alone, I'd rather swallow a live grenade.
And as you do, you say, "K."
That
Sera,
phrase should
Sera."
go on the description page.
To read or swallow a live grenade.
Decisions.
Cygnus, there is a story to recommend for you that Thorny started a reading of, The Flight of the Alicorn. That was Ponydora Prancy Pants.
Oh, very
course, I
good.
forgot.
All right.
He's also done some other ones, but that was the first one that leapt out as, oh, you probably have heard of this one and not known that it was Ponydora.
No, you're very right. I did not make the connection. So that, wow, excellent.
There's also The Fires of Friendship, which is some Rarajack friendshipping. Proper friend shipping. But it's actually
Except
quite
that
good.
it also tries to friendship them in this fic, and
That doesn't do quite as well. He also did Crude Stew, which was from the Equestria Daily Halloween Fanfiction Spooktacular from 2012, where we got body of work from.
All right, well, that gives me a great deal to look into now. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Ponydora Prancy Pants is a good author. I think it's more that this particular story is not the greatest example of his work and what he can do. Also, shit, having looked at this, he was offline, but he was last seen last Wednesday. He's totally going to see this podcast. Shit.
Oh, wait, he actually logged on?
He hasn't left the fandom.
Oh, you're kidding. That's interesting, because as far as I knew, he had completely disappeared. I actually did some looking back when I started the Flight of the Alicorn reading, and he'd been offline for plenty long enough time, and no one had been able to get a hold of them, and to all intents and purposes, they were just gone. So that is interesting.
Well, the last blog post on Fanfiction is from February 21st, 2015.
Yeah.
And the last story was from not long after that. So I think if he's checking back in, it is just to clear messages and stuff, probably. Because he's been a member of Fanfiction since September 2011, so a very early fandom alumnus. Plumbus. Stop me anytime, guys.
Should we move on?
Yeah, probably.
What was next?
Illya, your next point that you've added. Why keep Luna in the dark? Do you have anything to add to this one based on what we've said before, or do you want to make it a separate point?
Only that she seems to keep Luna in the dark a lot, in a lot of stories, and I don't know why that happens to be the case.
Maybe to increase Luna angst? I don't know. I honestly don't know. Most of the stories I like, they're equal standing.
Sorry, in this story in particular, there was really no reason to keep Luna in the dark. You could have just said, this giant dragon is attacking a Canterlot, and Luna's just sitting there because she hasn't been told in the 3,000 or so years previous that, hey, at some point in the future, this big dragon's gonna come attack Canterlot, but don't worry about it because predeterminism and all that. Especially, but in this moment where this dragon is crawling up Canterlot and everyone is going to die, and Celestia's like, I'm not worried because can't win, so whatever. Why not? Why not just in that moment, if not in the 1,000 years before, just say, yeah, it's a thing, it's going to happen because time travel, it's complicated, but yeah, just don't do anything for now. It's fine. Everything's fine.
You know what else could have been avoided? If they just sat down and talked about it like normal people? Nightmare Moon.
Had a whole 1,000 years 3,000 years or whatever to do that. Would have been plenty of time to sort all of that out.
That would have involved agency.
Yeah, and the stories that could have been instead of this one. I've just seen what the next point is. The next point on our list is Celestia and Luna's father. Some rando, and he died. R.I.P. Love, NP.
Yeah, rip.
Okay, Sera.
Do we need to elaborate on this one? The baby daddy thing?
I don't think we do.
To be honest, I just wanted to say it because it looked funny on the screen.
There was a male character in the story, apparently, or so I'm told, and now he's dead, so.
Morning star, but not morning glory.
There's only one small thing, if I might. There just seem to be very few, if any, strong male role models in this entire franchise. And I find it lacking. And this is like a glaring example of it. Just toss in a random guy. Oh, we need your sperm. Get lost. There's a lot of that in this franchise, I guess.
I have one rebuttal to that. Mr. Cake.
That's about it.
Yeah, but any character who can change a pooey nappy with his mouth is a wonderful role model.
Counterpoint, heteropaternal superfecundation.
Also true.
I actually like Shining Armor as a male character. I'm sure that's a can of worms, but...
Twily!
He is a good character. He's a good role model. He sticks by his family. He wants to provide for them. He is aware that just because he's the male half of a couple doesn't mean he absolutely has to be head of the family, because he's married to a fucking alicorn. And that doesn't seem to affect his sense of self at all.
You guys don't like quibble parents?
That could also be just because the world he's in is female-dominated, however loosely the writers tend to write that.
There's so many reverse gender role Equestria stories, especially prevalent in Anon in Equestria and Human in Equestria stories, where the gender roles in Equestria are switched, or there's been some really creative ideas explored that the actual gender distribution is actually skewed. I think they've largely fixed that. I think somebody actually went through the show and tabulated up all the male and female characters and found it's something like 55 and 45%. But I think, especially in the early seasons, there were just not very many male characters seen.
Sunburst is pretty much part of the main cast now.
I love Sunburst.
I tell you one thing about Shining Armor. As soon as they invent surfboards, he's out of here.
Why the hell does he sound like a surfer? That bothers me so much. I'm glad it's not just me.
You know, I never actually got that until literally everyone else told me, oh, he has a surfer accent. And honestly, I still don't hear it, so something's wrong with me.
I don't really get it either, to be honest. But then again, I come from the lands where going surfing in Cornish waters is an endurance test. It's not a thing that breeds a lackadaisical accent.
Twilight doesn't sound like him. His parents don't sound like him. Why does he randomly have like a surfer dude?
Explain Rarity's accent.
Because he was found in a cardboard box on their front step.
See, yeah, Rarity is an affectation. Her parents are clearly Midwestern, like from Michigan or something.
The Shining visited the past and brought something back with him.
More time travel.
No, like maybe he was in a fraternity where they like maybe he was a stoner.
Shining's not a frat boy though. He's like a D&D nerd as we see in the comics, and
that's what I'm talking about.
Illya was right all along. All right, we should probably move on.
Well,
We've totally lost our way at this point.
Just like the story.
To circle back around, I was hoping to make at least one tangentially related point to the unwitting sperm donor du jour. Mostly in that I don't understand, and I'm hoping that someone here can explain, why it seems to be that in certain circles of fanfiction, future happiness equals babies. Why?
I don't know, but that seems to be the theme of most media and aimed at my gender. Luna, back me up on this. Everything that seems to be purely aimed at women is all about marriage and babies.
Well, you know, that falling birth rate, you have to do your part for Britain. Lie back and think of Britain.
Okay, I'm slightly nauseous and I really want to move
I
on
know.
now.
Believe me.
Christ, like...
Anything else to say on that?
Yeah, babies apparently has always been trained into people as this is the way to happiness. They completely neglect the bit about the snotty noses, the pooey nappies, the school trips that cost money, the phone calls from the school when your child has set fire to the building because they didn't want to do their homework, the bits where you don't like your child's friends, your child's friends don't like you, your child is in a complete and utter tiz-wars because you've made them put on their boots, your child wants to dress themselves and you can't stand telling them that they can't wear Wellingtons, a tutu and a leotard out into the snow. They leave out all of this.
In the US, there's student loans.
The sleep deprivation.
Your career has been a really great contraceptive, hasn't it?
I'm never
You
eating
have
at
no
Sugar Cube
idea.
Corners again, I'll tell you that.
I'm tempted to read this message Kaylee sent me while we were recording about how things are going upstairs, but I think I'll refrain.
No, go ahead. You can't bring it up and then not share it.
Mickey was angry for some reason, so he went to pee and shook his penis while peeing. That was a fun mess. He angrily urinated all over the bathroom. Yeah, sorry, dear.
Angrily urinated. There's a phrase.
Righto. So on that note, are you still
That
glad
feeds
you insisted?
particularly into this. That was I was probably said something about this story that was absolutely relevant.
Fair enough. All right.
But yeah, moving on from the babies equal happiness, no they don't, stop it. Is using time travel as a plot device in this way cheap, Neighrator? It's your point?
I kind of think so. Maybe it wasn't necessary in this particular story, but it's just a plot device I always hate. Just time travel and alternate universes. I think the worst example I can think of was anybody remember the the Lost in Space movie?
Yeah,
Yes,
no, I haven't
the
thought
one
about that in
with
ages.
Matt LeBlanc and Heather Graham and the giant bunny in the glass. I remember that.
So glad I missed it.
Oh, yeah. Don't. Oh God, I was so let down. Okay, so anyway, they use time travel very, very, very conveniently as a way to explore the boy's relationship with his father, and it's just so cheap. The movie's about other things, but now it's and alongside with that, just like alternate universes in general, just this new Star Trek, the J.J. Abrams ones are all just like, okay, so it's an alternate universe and it didn't really happen, so why should we care? So
Also, Star Wars
Yes.
Legends.
Okay.
Star
Yay.
Wars Legends. Fuck that
Are they?
entire notion.
No. Go rewind. The J.J. Abrams Star Trek is dead?
Yes, because Discovery took over for it and is equally
That
crap.
and one of the Chris's, I forget which one is playing Captain Kirk. One of the Chris's, he's off
Oh.
the films now because of paycheck issues. So
Pine.
they have no Captain Kirk, so I don't think those movies are going on.
Oh.
And I'm not too broken up about it. But yeah,
Right.
so
It was all in an alternate universe, and no one cares. So
That's a shame, because the last film was actually quite good. And Simon Pegg finally got to write for them, which was also quite good.
that's a can of worms, and I'm not going to touch it in this podcast because we are so over time. But, so as far as time travel in this story, I actually did like it. Or at least I liked the idea of it. This is what I really wanted from the story, is I liked the idea that Twilight achieved a different kind of mythical status than she has, that through circumstances that I hoped were going to be a lot more epic, she wound up having to be in the past and is able to play a pivotal role in bringing Celestia and Luna around to their destinies. I really liked that concept. The execution, not so much, but I think this is a story where time travel could have given us something really good, and obviously would have been necessary for it to do so. So I personally didn't feel that the attempt was cheap.
I actually agree with you, as a matter of fact. So it's poorly done in other stories. Of all the other problems I have with this story, this was not necessarily one of them. This is one of the ones where I think that actually might be permissible.
Yeah, I think the only real problem with the time travel in this story is that it wasn't done as well as it could have been. It was basically, it created a missed opportunity upon missed opportunities.
And it's incredibly convenient, too, because it's never actually explained, as far as I recall, why they were sent to that particular point in time, in that particular location, Aurora Borealis.
I assumed it was like an accident as a result of, like, apparently the old worm, Ancient Spike, blasted her with some random, like, I guess the magical equivalent of the Wabbajack, and her...
So I can explain this bit. So Spike fired his magic, like scroll sending magic, and when that interacted with the elements of harmony at the same time, and then time travel,
Which is all
that's
well
how
and
it
good,
was
but
explained in the story, at least.
But then why that point in time?
because
Well, it was a
Wabbajack,
deliberate
because
act.
Wabbajack magic.
Wabbajack? What? Hang on. Rewind. Wabbajack. Is this some bastard offspring of Applejack and a rabbit?
I'm done. I'm fucking done.
Wabbajack.
I am fucking done. Goodbye.
This story would have actually been massively improved with the inclusion of Shoggorath, I think.
Shoggorath or Shub-Nuggerath?
Either or, really.
There's a reason that Angel runs around pissed off all the time.
The Wabbajack is like a staff. It's a staff governed by a mad god or a god of chaos or something that you can't control the effects. The effects that it has on targets when you use it are completely random. So you could either one hit kill something or turn it into a butterfly or just make it dance around for a few seconds.
Makes perfect sense. No, the reason they got sent back to that particular point in time is because that's a point in time from which the story, that's the point in time the story takes place. It has to be that point in time, otherwise the time loop wouldn't have happened, obviously.
Narrative causality is not an excuse.
Actually, I think I have an answer. Okay, so Spike went.
Yes.
Spike did go with them. Yeah, he
It was a
yeah,
deliberate
a
act on
deliberate
Spike's
act because he
part.
remembered. He remembered when they needed to go back, and there was all that talk that Celestia had in the beginning about like Spike's the old worm's ancient promise or something. So I'm assuming that what he'd done, that he had deliberately wabbajacked them into that particular time period.
Which is great, but Bootstrap Paradox, how did they figure out that that was the time that they had to send them to initially?
Because that's the time where the story happens. When they go back in time, that's the time that they go to.
Probably just pulled it out of their asses, honestly, because as long as it's within whatever number of decades of this happening, it should be fine, right?
It is Bootstrap Paradox. I'm being a butthead. This point in time arbitrarily because of that point in time.
This entire story is predicated upon a Bootstrap Paradox.
This is why time travel as a literary device does not really work that well in a serious story, I feel, because it needs to be so well thought out and so tightly explained that it's almost not worth the effort, I feel. Even if you're going to put in like one really big rule to sort of explain it all away, or to make an excuse why certain things can't happen. Like Time Cop had same matter cannot occupy the same space, for example. But I honestly feel that the only place that, at least nowadays, where time travel works the best is in comedies. Like I brought up Groundhog Day near the beginning of this podcast a million years ago. That works really well because that's never explained. The time loop is not explained. We don't know how it happens. We don't know why it happens, but you don't really care because all of the things that happen and the character development that comes along with it is so interesting and funny and intriguing that you don't really stop to question how the time loop operates, or to get for an even better example of just how crazy you can go and make people just not care about the fact that you're using time travel. Get ready for this one. Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. The weekday cartoon. Let me finish.
Are we talking Sat AM or actual?
The weekday cartoon.
Right.
AOSTH.
Yeah. It had a 5-part storyline, the only time they did a multi-part story, where Sonic had to go back in time in each of the episodes to find a Chaos Emerald. And Robotnik ends up getting them all at the end of the arc, but in order to stop him, Sonic goes back in time to each of those times before he got there initially, meeting up with his past self so that there could be 5 copies of Sonic brought to the future to fight Robotnik. And you don't question it at all because it just goes so over the top and ridiculous that you have no time to question why this would not work.
I went back and I bribed the architect first.
Well said.
Oh my god, yes! Red-nosed Day Doctor Who, shit.
That is excellent. Goombasa, you bring up an excellent point, and I think that that's one that doesn't get brought up enough. I can't remember, Scribbler, you'll have to remind me on this. Did I talk about this during our panel at BronyCon? Because one of the ways that you can get around like having to deal with all this hard sci-fi or time travel or whatever is not taking it seriously and lampshading the fact that you're not taking it seriously. That, as far as as far as I'm concerned, that's fine. As long as you have consistent rules going in, which again this did not, or some kind of explanation, or at least a hand wave to the effect that you're not giving a shit about it, then it still works. Comedic context to know.
If you're gonna do a fic with time travel in it that takes itself seriously, like it takes a lot of exploring and a lot of explaining to make it work well.
Well, and we have examples of that in our own fandom. Look at Hard Reset.
Yes.
There you go.
I still think a lot of the evils would have been mitigated if they just explored the characters better. That's my feeling.
Yep.
Absolutely agree.
It's good to have had a long, in-depth conversation between any of the two characters, really, about the the nature of predeterminism and sacrifice and all that, and that would have been fine.
Certainly.
Goombasa, you're in charge, apparently.
Am I?
Scribbler says she's going to be right back.
Yep, she's just asking you to she just wants you to move on with the next point for her.
Oh, okay. So the next point is Luna's, yet again. You had a lot of points for this story.
Look at Thornquill!
Reincarnation of the elements never addressed. What exactly did you mean by that?
I was very confused reading this fic about what the origin of Twilight Sparkle in the first place was, because I was under the impression, it only occurred to me afterward that this was more of a Weeping Angel sort of situation when I was in this conversation with you folks.
Oh, no.
And I think we addressed this.
I think it's fine. So yeah, the Twilight Sparkle and the elements, they were all born to their parents, normally, all the ones we meet in the show. And then
they just happened to die in the past instead of in a chronological way.
Right, so it's not I don't think it's actually a plot hole. But
I think we already went over this point, so I think we can move ahead.
Yeah, it kind of goes back into the Bootstrap Paradox. So next one was Thornquill's point. Cheerful suicide and murder/euthanasia as a casually unquestioned only option for making the story happen. Discuss.
Okay. And I mean, I think we have covered a lot of the central tenets of this question. We've covered that the characters don't care enough about this happening. We've discussed that their relationships should make them care more about this happening and should bring more conflict into that. Even so, though, I guess I just found this ending so disturbing. And again, I don't even know how Twilight comes to this conclusion. I don't know where she gets the idea that they need to pour their own souls into the gemstones to create the element of harmony, because early in the story, she considers searching for the elements of harmony and decides not to because Celestia and Luna need to find them. So I don't know where this ending comes from, other than this is trying over the top, just ham-fisted, trying to rip at our heartstrings, and it fails so spectacularly for me because no one's cared about anything in this story up to now. Why should we care about this? What is with the idea that the characters are so willing to completely sacrifice themselves when it has not been made clear that it's absolutely necessary?
That might have been like a leap too far to make. That was quite an assumption to assume that they were actually the elements of harmony. They had to commit suicide and sort of mythically put themselves into these gemstones. It would have been quite embarrassing if Celestia and Luna had come back. Discord is up there running amok, and they're searching for the elements, and they find them. Say, hey, I found them, you guys. I found the elements of harmony. Where's Mom? Where's Mom and Rarity and everybody? Where'd they go?
This particular aspect of the notion of this being an origin story for the elements of harmony in the first place could have been done a lot better if the crucial scenes, which we, as we discussed, were probably intentionally left out and not written, had been written and had been given more depth and allowed the character more agency. And I think that would have served the story's point and its title even better, because then you'd be able to journey with the characters toward an understanding of what Que Sera Sera means.
That would have been pretty good. I agree. Now that I think back on it, though, I think there was an attempt to explain that Rarity said she tried to use her gem finding spell and could determine that the elements of harmony were not anywhere, that they didn't exist anywhere. And also I think there was some notion of like they sort of couldn't feel any connection to the elements anywhere. So I think that was kind of explained, that they realized the elements of harmony didn't exist in this world, and that is why they had to.
It's hand-waved away rather than explained.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hell of an assumption to take, because I actually did just find that section where Twilight says, when Discord first appeared, I was so certain that the princess would come to the sound of blaring trumpets, elements of harmony in tow, and defeat him just like that. I should have known when you told me you couldn't sense the elements anywhere. With your skill in locating gemstones and the connection to your element, it should have been obvious that they didn't exist. No, they could still very well exist. It doesn't mean Rarity is absolutely end-all authority. And again, at the start of this paragraph is where the blaseness of this is just astonishing, because we've gone from expecting the elements will be found to Rarity saying it sounds like something you can do. So Twilight's just broached her plan. Of course, I shall do everything in my power to help you. You do know what it would mean if we succeed, Twilight asked. That we all die? Yes, that thought did occur to me upon you first proposing to siphon out my life essence. Oh, did it? Did that occur to you?
Can we talk about this conspiracy to murder suicide? This is not just cheerful suicide / murder euthanasia. This is conspiracy to murder suicide that is never explained and never gone into any depth about.
This is drink the Kool-Aid levels of what the fuck.
Literally. Oh my god.
Remember what I said a yonk ago about inconsistency of tone?
Okay, can we just put in the description? Today we're going to drink Bootstrap Kool-Aid.
If I remember, I will put that in. If I don't, then the comment section can cry out for it.
Yes, hello, paging Dr. Kevorkian.
I suppose this is where, if you guys are right, and I think it's a very good idea, that Ponydora had lost their steam in writing this fic, this is where it would really show, because there's just nothing here, and it's so over the top, disturbing, and dark.
It's not even like a heroic sacrifice or anything, because again, the emotional connection is nowhere to be found here. And if you were going to find it anywhere, it should be during this.
Absolutely. For this to be a heroic sacrifice, they need to have tried every other option. They need to have searched for the elements of harmony. And the world needs to be on the brink of absolute Ruin and Twilight and them all realize there is nothing left. We have to at least try this, because if we don't, everything is over anyway. And it's a tragic sacrifice, but it's justified, and there's conflict.
We need to see it. We need to see all of that too.
Let me just play the devil's advocate for a moment, and just say that, when they turn themselves into the elements of harmony and also become stars somehow, they didn't die exactly. Like, their souls live on, and she said that she will watch over them, and the stars will aid in their escape, and that's part of why the Nightmare Moon, the stars were able to help her get out of the moon, apparently. So when they died, they didn't die exactly. Maybe it's more like the Jedi turn into the glowy hologram thing, sort of dying.
I will acknowledge that the possibility for that is floated a few times in the story. Twilight asks, I think at the beginning, that she hopes that is what will happen. She also says at the end of this fic, in this part, I'm talking about murdering the 5 ponies I love most in the world. The wrongness of, if Ponydora had,
Fair
outright
point.
said, this is what happens. They don't necessarily die. They change forms and go on to continue to protect the world they love. Or even left it open, but hinted so much more strongly in that direction, I might be more okay with it. This, to me, trends more in the direction of, I'm going to vaporize you, and you're going to become a tool that we ourselves will use later on. Oh, I just do not like this. It takes everything about what a heroic sacrifice should be, leaves it out, and just makes death into such a casual, meaningless thing. I do not like it.
And then Fluttershy is like, but will it hurt? And Twilight's like, oh it's gonna hurt, yeah. And Fluttershy's like, oh, okay.
Thorny, what was that?
That was my twisted and demented, I have nothing left in my sanity laugh.
Twilight. Hey, Twilight. I don't feel so good.
I don't feel so good after reading this
Oh
ending.
my god. Not again.
Oh no, Thorny's evaporating.
Have you noticed that Spike managed to exempt himself from all of this pain and sorrow?
I don't know. He got buried in a volcano.
Well, yeah, because
But
he's gotta grow up to kill them in the future.
But the weird thing is, he's the only creature that exists with a copy of himself in the same timeline, which is kind of disturbing to me.
He sent him his one version of himself was sent back into the past, sends his present day self back to the past. Like, he's the one that does that. He's the one that literally, metaphorically pulls the trigger in the classic paradox.
But before he pulls the trigger, he's existing with Spike in the modern timeline alongside Spike. There's 2 Spikes.
Can I point out a
Sure.
real cop-out of the ending, even more so than all that? That
Yes.
the worm is magically transformed back into the Spike of the show, including,
Public and
I'm
didn't-
just a baby dragon line at the end.
Wasn't there an entire episode dedicated to how a dragon could grow from a baby dragon into how they had to figure out how to bring
Tickle
Spike
my
back to his
access.
normal self?
Yes.
So why would this fic just write
Yes.
it out as, oh, he can just do that?
Oh, that's an interesting. That could be a plot hole, as a matter of fact. So, when did Spike make the connection? He's like, oh, I'm the old worm. Why wouldn't he have just assumed it was just some other dragon? Was that ever explained?
Nope.
Plot hole.
Lots of them.
Yeah, he's just like, yeah, we encountered this dragon, then we all got sent back in time. So, wait, what do you mean I'm the dragon? Who told him that? When was that connection made?
The only feasible explanation I can see is that something happened between him and Celestia over time. He knows he's supposed to watch over Celestia, but the only thing I can see is maybe he ages and becomes the old worm just through his own experiences and circumstances and decisions.
He
I
also
know.
is living in a volcano, and apparently they say it's close to the center of the world, and he's been bathing in the old magics down there.
I can find this. 1 second. He just says well, it's towards the end. I think it's right before Twilight, does the I don't feel so good thing. He says, well, time to go find a volcano and sleep for a couple hundred years. It's like, wait a minute.
Maybe he's watching. I guess he's watching over Celestia and Luna from inside the volcano.
This is stupid.
Yeah.
Are we sure that this isn't the fucking the divided into 3 parts Hobbit movie I'm listening to?
It's a troll fic.
Well, on that note, that might be all the points we had on.
Yeah, that might be all the points we had, apart from the title, which I think we've talked about, and the final and most important question. Goody,
What?
is this better than Green?
I think he's going to take a moment.
With all the problems that we've discussed, with all of our going off topic and tangents and wandering off the beaten path for 2 hours and 28 fucking minutes, is this better than Green?
All right, so I'm going to give this judgment based on hearsay from a lot of you and the fact that I've heard a lot of insight and intrigue that was handled in various different ways in this story. I'm going to have to go with yay.
Confirmed here on Them's Writin Words, this is still better than Green.
You heard it here first, folks.
Is this going to be the new baseline now?
Whenever Goody's around it is.
To be fair, that is not an unfair baseline, as a baseline. Live Grenade, remember.
Yeah, and you say that as somebody who hasn't read it.
Who would rather swallow a bomb than read it?
I think this is a pretty good note to leave this discussion on. So, final thoughts before we divest people of our wonderful presence. Goombasa?
Well, you can tell that this has been a very interesting conversation, because I don't think I've ever been this sassy during a conversation like this.
Apart from Puppet 2FM, where you opened with "fuck this story."
Yes. I think your time is just really better spent elsewhere than on this story. If you want to read something by this author, read pretty much anything else they've written.
Illya?
Despite what we've said, some of my best friends are Ponydora Prancy Pants.
Luna?
Despite all of the sarcasm and vitriol I threw around about this fic, I cannot say that I did not enjoy it a little bit.
Thornquill?
Okay, I'll probably have the most to say about the end of this one. Ordinarily, I'm with you, NP, in being able to enjoy a story in spite of things it might have done wrong. I think that's important. If you can't enjoy a story when it does something wrong, then you have no heart. This one, unfortunately, I cannot like in spite of its flaws, because to me, the one mistake you cannot make is be boring. And this story makes itself boring in more ways than one. There's no conflict, there's no emotion, there are no relationships. If any one of these things had been in there, it would have brought this story into salvageable territory. But if your story is boring, then it doesn't matter how good your idea is. You have, in my mind, betrayed the one obligation you have to your reader, which is to interest them. Now, look, Ponydora Prancy Pants tried to do a lot of highly technical, challenging things in writing this story. Time travel, non-linear narrative, a more mythical style, multi-point of view. So many things packed in there. I really think this story tried to bite off way more than it could chew just on a technical writing level. And that is how you grow as a writer. You challenge yourself. And sometimes it just falls apart. Ponydora is a good writer. And as Goombasa said, I'm really thrilled that he said this, every good writer has stories that just don't quite work. Charles Dickens almost destroyed his life and career with the 3 failed novels that came before A Christmas Carol. So whether Ponydora comes back to fandom or they're out there doing their own thing in their own life right now, I hope they continue to write more, because their stories are worth writing and they are worth reading. And I am done.
And finally, the fic picker himself, Neighrator. Final thoughts? Have we changed your mind about this story at all during the podcast?
It is a good fic. Okay, so it is a good fic to learn from, but I have to say that I think it still has. It also still stands on its own red, and I admit I teared up a little bit at the final scene as they're saying goodbye to their daughter, as the 2 daughters are saying goodbye to their mother. So I cried, admittedly more than the 2 characters did. But yeah, still a story worth reading for more than one reason.
And I think that is one thing that we should acknowledge. A lot of people have really loved this story. And readers do bring themselves to the story as well. And they might put more emotion into the story. I think that may be also what has happened, is that what the readers brought to the story elevated it above itself. It didn't work for me, but if it worked for someone else, then fantastic.
The My Little Dashie effect.
Yeah, I suppose.
Well, that's an awful thing to say. Come on.
Too right.
Hey, some people might say that about this story, but not about My Little Dashie.
Goodness.
Your mileage may vary, and that's pretty much
Your
where
mileage
I'm
may
going to...
Que sera, sera!
I don't think I need to say anything of my own final thoughts because you've all summed it up, and to be honest, I can't beat that. It's My Little Dashie effect, que sera, sera. Let's pick the next fic picker. And we are, for next time, it is between Illya, Cygnus, and Luna, neither of whom have had a fic pick yet. So I will spin the wheel. It be spinning. It be spinning.
Wheel of fic pickery, turn.
The fic picker is Cygnus.
Oh, really?
Hey!
Well, that's entertaining.
So, Cygnus, what story have you chosen for us next time?
Well, I've actually chosen one that I think it's going to be very difficult for you people to rip apart because it's 1,500 words, and it's incredibly good. Dance by Martian.
Not heard of it before, so I shall look forward to reading it.
Haven't read it.
I am told that Martian is quite good.
1,500 words.
New blood.
1,500 words, so we'll be doing this for 5
So,
hours
yeah.
next time?
We've beaten last time's count by 5 minutes already because we were recording for 2.5 hours last time, and this time we have just touched upon 2 hours 35.5 minutes at the time of speaking.
Good heavens.
So we're just gonna have to spend 5 hours talking about singing the praises of the next Vic, don't we?
If this turns out to be like a 20-minute podcast, we will all just go, yeah, it's good. Then our fans are just going to be like, what? We did not come here for this. Where's the vitriol?
But I will be vindicated.
We'll see, because Goombasa and Neighrator likes their choices too. Right, with that, we have been Them's Writing Words. I have been Scribbler, and I bid you adieu. Say goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, say goodbye. Say goodbye, words. Say goodbye, Cygnus.
Goodbye.
Oh, fucking hell, I can't speak.
Goodbye.
Goombasa.
Sayonara.
Illya.
Have a wonderful time, Interval.
Luna.
This is an X, Luna. Goodbye.
Neighrator.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thornquill.
Take care and see you next time.
And the wild random Guti.
Ciao, folks. Thanks for having me in the background. Have you untied yet?
I'll put you in the thumbnail. Just a random shouting Guti in the background. And with that, we say goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 And we're done.
Oh, goodness.
Holy shit.
Yeah, 2 hours, 37 minutes by the end.
I don't like being that critical on a story. I really don't.